Welcome back to another edition of Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. In this preview, we'll be taking a look at the Grade 1 $1 Million Pennsylvania Derby from Parks coming up this Saturday, September 24th. Mile and an eighth for the 3-year-olds on the dirt. A stellar group of 11 colts set to take place in this race. Couldn't be more excited for it. Obviously a race that's just gained more and more traction each and every year with great winners, some of the best 3-year-olds come to play. And honestly, I think this is one of the deepest groups yet. I can only think of maybe 2016 when you had Nyquist and Exaggerator and Gunrunner and Connect all showing up at Parks for a stellar race. And I think this rivals that. Obviously not as many Triple Crown race winners, but the quality is still there. One really cool note about this race, the Kentucky Derby Trail, the 100-point prep races of the group of those. There's only 4 of them that are Grade 1s. And every single Grade 1 winner of a 100-point Kentucky Derby prep race this year is in this race. So that'd be your Bluegrass winner, Zandon. That'd be your Arkansas Derby winner, Cyberknife. That'd be your Santa Anita Derby winner, Taiba. And that'd be your Florida Derby winner, Abarrio. So the longevity, the ability for these horses to stick around even after the Derby prep season, all of those horses competed in the Kentucky Derby. Now they all make their way here in this late September event. Plus, bunch of good also-rans or prep race winners throughout the schedule, and horses that have started to progress a little later in the year. It's just a great mix. It makes for an exciting race. And as I'll dive into it, there's not really tactical advantages that anybody necessarily has. So it's going to be kind of a jock's race too. Who wants to get the best position? Who wants to win the race? Because nobody's going to be benefited by a pace scenario, in my opinion, in this spot, which isn't usually. That's not usually the case, especially in some of these high-level races. Usually you can find an angle based on setup. Don't think you can find it here. So let's dive into this field of 11. Just very excited, as you can probably tell, by the quality in this race. And we'll start with the one Zandon, Derby 3rd, Jim Dandy 2nd, Travers 3rd. I mean, he's ran a winning race, and it feels like every race of his career without actually getting the job done. Obviously, he's getting better, though. By metric standards, he's improving on all fronts from his Bluegrass win. Kind of stayed the same or maybe got 1 or 2 points better in the Derby, and then gotten a little better in the Jim Dandy and the Travers. But the problem with him is he can't actually find himself in front. He's kind of become the bridesmaid of this class. After the Bluegrass win, it seemed like the world was at his fingertips. He could win anything, went off very well bet in the Kentucky Derby, ran a great third that day, but his knock on that day was he couldn't get past Epicenter despite having the whole length of the stretch to do it. And also, he had the better setups. He was coming from further back in a race where he needed to come from further back, and he still couldn't get past. Then he dropped 2 more straight decisions to Epicenter. However, you might say, well, there's no Epicenter, so he'll be able to take care of business here. Not necessarily the case in the Jim Dandy. He was only a half length in front of Tawny Port. In the Travers, he was only a nose and a neck in front of Zandon in Derby winner Rich Strike. So he, on top of not being able to really put horses away, or at least put Epicenter away, he isn't distancing himself from others. So he certainly proves beatable. Maybe without Epicenter here, he can be a little bit better, but I don't know. I don't think he's without a chance in here. I just question his willingness to win, because it's not like he's just lost to Epicenter. He's lost to some other really quality horses like Smile Happy, or he finishes behind these horses, Smile Happy and Zandon, throughout this prep season in Graded Stakes Company. So just you can keep coming up with all these excuses, like maybe this will be the day, but it feels like it's more of a hope thing, in that when he finds this level, he might not be able to really take it to the top. He can run well, he just can't find himself in the winner's circle. The 2 pretty easy pass over here, Icy Storm, former claimer, at least he sported himself in the claiming ranks actually, or April this year, he could have gotten him for $8,000, even in May actually. He rattled off 3 in a row, rising up the levels, non-2, non-3, all the way up to an open claiming race. So he's risen the ranks, and then he finished 2nd, albeit beat 5.5 at Parks in an allowance in August, so he's good for that level, but grade 1 caliber, not so much. It would be a big surprise if he could turn it around in here. 3 is Dawk, 20-1 morning line, so once again another bit of a price. Makes a little bit more sense. He's takes competitor before. Broke his maiden and career start number 5 at Keeneland. That was a late April race where he absolutely demolished the field, going that about 7/8 distance that Keeneland offers, won by 11 lengths. Returned a month later in the Sir Barton, finished 2nd, well beaten by Ethereal Road, but ran a big race, given it was his first time against winners, and it was in Stakes Company. Followed that up with a weird loss in Allowance Company. Then he won last time out, going 7/8 again. Feels like more of a sprinter. That's really what he stuck to. This will be the longest he's ever ran, which Mile and an eighth really isn't that long in the grand scheme of things, so the fact this is the longest he's ever gone suggests maybe the connections don't think he can try these distances, given there's been ample opportunity throughout the year to try it. And he also just kind of got tired in the Sir Barton, his longest race, going a mile and a 16th Preakness weekend at Pimlico. So that to me suggests probably more of a miler and probably even more of a 6-7 furlong type, because obviously that's kind of what the connections have leaned to. This will only be his second journey around 2 turns. And the one time we did get that from him, he did peter out pretty quickly. I think he'll be a pace factor. He'll probably find himself up front early on, especially stretching out once more. He likes to be forwardly placed in those sprints, so you can envision routing. He'll be in the firing line, but all things considered, probably not his day on distance alone. He has talent, maybe not grade 1 talent, but he can compete, I think, in lower level graded stakes, but not going 2 turns. 4 is Skippylongstocking, your West Virginia Derby winner. This was one of those late bloomers I was talking about earlier. A horse who competed in the Triple Crown Trail, ran in 2/3 of it, the Preakness and the Belmont. Ran an okay 5th in the Preakness, but really, really impressed in the Belmont. Sure, he was beaten 6 lengths, but he ran a great 3rd behind Mo Donegal and Nest, too. Of course, not much more I can say about Nest and Mo Donegal, although we'll unfortunately never get to see him again on the racetrack. Certainly was built for the Belmont, and he proved it that day. But an excellent 3rd for Skippylongstocking, finished in front of some really nice horses like a Creative Minister and a Rich Strike. So he backed that up even more so. A career best performance in the West Virginia Derby, set a perfect stalking trip, withstood We the People in the stretch, and was well clear of Simplification and others. A pretty solid field, graded stakes caliber field, horses who absolutely fit in this race return here. And he beat them, and it wasn't like those other 2 had excuses. He beat them on the spot, and We the People probably had a pace advantage as well in there. We'll talk about that with him and why that hurts his chances in here when we get to We the People. But for Skippylongstocking, impressive group he beat, and he's one who, I mean, he was facing really tough horses in that 3-race stretch from the Wood to the Belmont, where he was losing to Mo Donegal in early voting, but chasing him home. The Preakness, early voting, epicenter, once again, to the best of the best, but then the Belmont more of the same. Then he found his level in the West Virginia Derby. Horses not far off. I mean, not the level of a Mo Donegal early voting or an epicenter, but not very far off. And he stuck with them as good as he could, and he beat them in the West Virginia Derby. So I think he might be interesting at a price, given he's clearly on the improve. Where a couple of these horses might have plateaued or might be declining even, he has gotten better as the year has gone on. So a horse I definitely think you need to consider at least underneath. But I mean, with how wide open and competitive this race is, certainly not inconceivable to see him win this race. Saffie Joseph, he's pulled off an upset in this race before. He won with Math Wizard back in 2019 at a big price, a horse who had a much worse chance than Skippylongstocking does coming on Saturday. 5 is Cyberknife, morning line second choice at 3-1. Brad Cox, Laurent Giroux. One of the best 3-year-olds in the country on resume, that's for sure. He's won 4 of 7 starts this year, earned over $1.7 million, including 2 Grade 1 wins, the Arkansas Derby and the Haskell. And I mean, if you take out his 2 very bad runs in the Lecompte and the Derby, he's got probably the best record amongst 3-year-olds, in this crop. Just huge race after huge race. And honestly, you can give him excuses for both. The Lecompte, he threw blinkers on. It clearly was not his cup of tea. He was very weird throughout that, but he bounced back strong to win a couple in a row. The Derby was a bad race because he found himself way too close to a hot pace, but he's done a lot of good since. Back-to-back graded stakes wins, including a Haskell win over Taiba, Jack Christopher and Howling Time, and White Abarrio. And then the Travers was out on the lead. First time he'd ever done that in his career. Was a little interesting, but he still stuck around. Finished a good second, well beaten by a no doubt about it winner in Epicenter, and he held off Zandon and Rich Strike, who tried to pass him down the lane, and he did not let them by. So certainly have to credit him for that. He's adaptable. Definitely won't see him on the lead this time around. Imagine him to be in a stalking position. Probably, I could even see him being 5th or 6th early on in this race. There's not a ton of speed, but horses that usually have a little bit more early foot than our subject Cyberknife does. So we'll see how that plays into his hands. But point being, you have to like that versatility aspect for him. And he's a horse who's beaten some talented horses throughout the year. Arkansas Derby, he beat the Oaks winner, Secret Oath. Matt Wynn, he beat Howling Time and Rattle and Roll, who are definitely cut below, but they can win stakes on their best days when they find the level. And then the Haskell, certainly the most impressive. Had to navigate traffic. I won't say he had a worse trip than Taiba, but I definitely won't say he had a better trip than Taiba. And he was still able to, beat him on the nod in the Haskell. It was a battle down the lane, and he prevailed. He was very determined that day, and he reamped that determination more so in the Travers when he was able to hold off those latecomers trying to nab him for second. And that's just kind of been a proven thing over his last 3 races. You've seen the fight this horse has, and you certainly have to like it. And I think one more thing before we move on is this is a horse who's never, I really don't think it matters, but it's just very interesting when you look at his running lines. This is a horse who has never crossed the line in a spot other than the first 2 times in a row. Debut. I mean, you can maybe look at the caveat of that first start into the second start where he technically was second twice, but of course he was DQ'd from that first effort. But other than that, he's never had back-to-back losses. He's a horse who really bounces back well from defeats because he showed that in the allowance race in February in the Matt win, and who knows, maybe he could show it here in the Penn Derby. We the People is the 6, a horse who won the Peter Pan so nicely 3 starts ago, disappointed in the Belmont when the distance probably got to him. That's not a 1.5 mile horse. The West Virginia Derby, though, really, really questionable, where he ran second to Skippylongstocking, who he went over. He's a good horse, but the problem is We the People had everything his own way, and he's a horse who, when he has everything his own way, should be able to win as nicely as he has in his 3 career victories. But the West Virginia Derby just beat on the spot, despite having an advantage over Skippylongstocking, who sat right off of him but didn't make him work harder. I mean, We the People was going at his own pace. He could have gone as quick or as slow as he wanted to, and he did, but he still lost. He got overhauled in the stretch. So to me, get a little more tough company in addition to Skippylongstocking. I just don't see how he's any better. I think he's a really nice horse. I just thought the West Virginia Derby was a very concerning race, given he wasn't able to put away a horse of that that returns in here, and now on 2 separate occasions, I might add, has finished in front of him, because in the Belmont, Skippylongstocking did the same. So, especially if you don't think Skippylongstocking's a winner in here, don't really see how We the People is. I think he has a good tactical advantage. He's going to be on the lead. It's going to benefit him because I think, once again, probably set his own pace. But at the same time, we know it doesn't really matter because he did it in the West Virginia Derby and he got put away by a horse who looked like inferior on paper. So that's my 2 cents on We the People. I think he's a pretty easy stand against in here based off that last run. 7 is Tawny Port, another one of these later bloomers. He won the Lexington nicely in April off of a graded stakes, placing in the Jeff Ruby behind Tiz the Bomb and finished in front of Kentucky Derby winner Rich Strike. But you had to have been impressed with his Derby run. But his last 2 starts have just been very, very strong. There's no other way to put it. We'll go 2 back to the Ohio Derby. He comes from off the pace as the favorite after that solid Kentucky Derby start. And he beats Abarrio, and he beats Grade 1 Winter Classic Causeway in extremely strong fashion. Just worked out the trip beautifully. And then the Jim Dandy was only beaten 2 lengths by Epicenter and was only a half length off of Zandon. So I think his last 4 races have really been good. And I think other than the Ohio Derby, he's really been disrespected on those 3 occasions. So he's always had the class. He's always had the potential. I think a lot of people maybe looked at the Derby heading into the Jim Dandy as, oh, well, he really benefited from the pace that day. It won't be the same against these kinds of horses against an Epicenter and a Zandon this time round. But he was not disgraced against them. So I don't think he'll be disgraced here. I think he's going to have to work out a trip, and he might be a little bit more on the pace-dependent side, which doesn't really exist here. But you'll expect him to be running late. He will be. It's just, will the others in front of him that got more forwardly placed trips be in better position? Things you have to weigh. I think he's a contender, but I do worry about that. The 8 is Taiba, the winner of the Santa Anita Derby. Barely lost to Cyberknife in the Haskell. Just a very nice horse. He's done a lot of good in his 4 career starts, of course, in the Derby. Had so much hype coming into that race. Some thought he could be the next Justify. Obviously didn't work out. Once again, was a casualty of that rapid pace. But he bounced back well in the Haskell. I thought it was a weird ride. I thought he was in the right position early on. Then Mike Smith kind of just let him be around the turn and let others get first run, most notably Cyberknife. When he tilted out, he still had every chance to win, though, and then he couldn't get by Cyberknife. So not necessarily a knock on Taiba, just more of a positive for Cyberknife, of course, but you do wonder. And he's really never won a race of consequence, I might add. He broke his maiden nicely, but what was in that race? Won the Santa Anita Derby nicely, but nothing good came of that. Obviously, Messier hasn't ran since the Kentucky Derby, where he really struggled, and then third place Happy Jack, so on and so forth. Just not much there. So he can hang with these types in the Haskell, but winning against them is a whole different thing. So we'll see how he can do. He certainly has the talent to win it. 5-2 morning line favorite. Wouldn't be surprised if he goes off favorite or a close second choice to Cyberknife. Either way, a really talented runner who just still has a bit to prove in my eyes, but he certainly can play in here. 9 is Simplification, personal favorite of mine, but he hasn't won since March when he won the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth. It was a good win that day, and then he backed it up with some solid efforts. Florida Derby was a weird trip, but he ran well. Kentucky Derby was a career race for him when he ran fourth there. Preakness, they said he bled, still was a poor performance. And then the West Virginia Derby, he just kind of got pummeled by Skippylongstocking and We the People, where once again he sat this really good stalking trip. He was not far off of those two leaders, but they just distanced themselves down the lane. He just tired for no visible reason. So as good as he might be, there's nothing telling me he can turn the tables on even White Abarrio, who probably doesn't have much of a chance in here, and especially none of these other high-quality horses like a Zandon, a Cyberknife, Taiba, Skippylongstocking, We the People. Right? There's just been nothing to prove in that last race, and even the few before that, to suggest he can be a little better. So I would like for him to win, of course, for personal reasons, but I just don't think it's there on paper for him to be able to turn the tables on any of the horses that have finished in front of him this year. The 10, Naval Aviator, another former claimer, actually claimed off of Brad Cox in May in a non-2-lifer for a $50,000 tag. He's won 1 cent and he's finished second in 1 cent. He won a starter allowance at Churchill Downs 2 back in June, and then actually ran in an open 1X at Saratoga. Tough race because he had to go up against Keep Me in Mind, who aired in there and then was well regarded for the Jockey Club Gold Cup, although he didn't run well. But it was a good second coming from well off the pace. But that's where I think we find one disadvantage, and also just the class. I don't think it's the class of these horses, and I also think he's really up against it from a pace and area standpoint. I wouldn't read too much into the whole former claimer thing because he's actually ran very well at the allowance level on multiple occasions. It wasn't like last time was a one-off super performance. Early on in his career, he was actually running some pretty deep races, but still a cut below, right? He can be decent, but he's still going to be a cut below in Grade 1 company. And the 11 is Florida Derby winner White Abarrio. Picks up Luis Saez for the first time. A horse who had a lot of potential heading into the Derby, was so wide throughout. It was just a terrible trip for him. To no fault of Tyler Gaffalione, there was just not a reasonable spot to tuck in. Also just kind of got taken out of his game. He split the field. He was about 7-8 lengths out of it throughout, and he typically wants to be a little closer than that. He wants to be in a true stalking position. So the Derby, tough run. You would have hoped he'd bounce back in the Ohio Derby. Ran a good second to Tawny Port, who we talked about being really good because he got that trip. Then the Haskell just, once again, nothing went his way. I think he's much better than the Derby and the Haskell run suggest, but of course they just leave a really sour taste in your mouth because the 2 bad performances against these types of horses don't make you feel any better about what kind of horse he can be. We know he can be Grade 1 caliber, but we can make all the excuses we want while also acknowledging he has really faltered against the Cyberknives and the Zandons and the Taibas of the world. So he can work out a better trip, but also the wide post position doesn't do him any favors. There's pretty reasonable to believe he'll be in at least the 4 path when they make their way into the first turn. So he's a really nice horse. You want him to, you think maybe if he can find a better trips and work things out better than the Derby and the Haskell, he'll be in good shape, but that's a big if against these kinds of horses. There's a lot of talent in here. So with that, obviously a ton to break down with each and every horse here. Have to give them their due because they have the ability. I'm going to go with Cyberknife. I think Brad Cox has had this horse firing on all cylinders since the Derby. I think other than the one-off performance there, he's been exceptional since that allowance win in February where it seemed just like the light turned back on for him. And he's really coming to his own. The maturity and the maturation just in general of this horse has been very impressive to watch over the year because he's become just a much different horse from the Lecomte to the Travers second, and I think there's a good chance he takes it one step forward here. I mean, he's gotten, I will say the one thing is he's gotten better with every race, right? Visually, figures, maturity. Is there going to be a peak? Yeah, there has to be. That's how it works. There's eventually going to be a peak that we see from Cyberknife. So that could maybe be a concern. Was the Travers just his best or the Haskell just his best, and that's it? I'm going to say no. I really like it. I think Brad Cox keeps his horses in good form, and we see it again here, and I love his adaptability to work out the right trip. I think there's really not many ways to get creative in here. I will say Skippylongstocking, though, if he's to hit the board, would not surprise me one bit because he's one who's getting genuinely better at the right time, and I don't think he's a horse who's actually reached his best. That West Virginia Derby was so impressive to me. I thought it taught us a lot about the top 3 in there, and most importantly taught us that Skippylongstocking is a real player. in the graded stakes level for these for these 3-year-olds. So I think Skippylongstocking is one way to get creative in here, using him in some facet, but I think the winner will ultimately be Cyberknife in what is going to be a very exciting, competitive, and telling edition of the Pennsylvania Derby. Wish you good luck if you're playing it. Enjoy a great card at Parks. I cannot wait to get into this one. There's so many good races from race 1 all the way down to the end of the card. So please enjoy it. Once again, good luck if you're playing it, and we'll see you next time here on Racing Rundown.